Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. We are going to be jumping into a very loaded topic. We're not going to finish it all today. Next week I will not be here, but the week after, Meretz Hashem, God willing, we'll pick up. So the topic is opening food packages on Shabbos, okay? There's so much to talk about, and as we'll see just from the opening lines, there are so many different factors. Until now we've been talking about, okay, tying, knotting, etc. So we focus on, tying your shoes, twist tie, it's very limited. Over here, as we'll see, each type of package that we're going to be focusing on, we have to deal with at least 6 different possible prohibitions that have to be dealt with for each one. And so I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the different prohibitions, and then we're going to start plugging them in to the different applications. And again, we're not going to finish this today. At least 2 classes, maybe even 3, as we go through this topic. Okay? So with that, let's jump in. We'll begin first with a list of the 6 different prohibitions that could possibly be violated when opening a food package on Shabbos. The first is something called stira. Stira means to destroy, and it's specific to destroying a utensil, okay? I want to be clear about that because, as we'll see, if something is not defined as a utensil halachically, then the prohibition of destroying may not apply. So, for example, something which is, if a person rips a tissue, for example, just in front of my line of vision, that would not be in violation of stira, of destroying. You may not be able to do it for no reason, but let's say a person were to rip a tissue, it would certainly not be in violation of stira, of destroying, because destroying is specific to destroying a utensil. Okay, so in addition to saying, does stira apply, or the first thing we have to ask is this halachically treated as utensil or more like a tissue? Okay, fine. That's number 1. Number 2, binyan, creating a utensil. Sometimes by opening something, you may actually go ahead and, although you're trying to get something out of it, and you may decide to describe it as an act of destroying, but in truth, in some way, you're actually making it functional, and therefore you've just created a utensil. So that's also something we're going to have to deal with, which would also be a possible prohibition. Okay, so again, first 2 prohibitions we have to deal with is stira and binyan. Number 3, asiyas pesach. Okay, so there is a broad prohibition called makeh bepatish, which means putting the final touch on an item. Okay, it's a prohibition on Shabbos, putting the final touch on something. So when you make a nice opening, and again, asiyas pesach means Pesach literally means an opening, but as we'll see, it doesn't. As I'll explain now, it does not mean making any opening. If a person were to go ahead and chop off the top of this plastic bottle, that would not be asiyas pesach. Okay, because that's not like a normal. Even though it's an opening, it's a pesach is specifically a nice opening, because that's the finishing touches. There's something here, and I'm finishing it. I'm completing it. If I go ahead and just chop the top of this, that's like almost a destructive act. It's clearly not meant to finalize the item. And therefore, the prohibition is when I make a nice opening. And of course, we have to define what is nice, right? That is a wide open, term that's wide open to interpretation, okay? Number 4, korea. Sorry.
It's forbidden because of what?
Either mitaken mana, which is another term for makeh bepatish. Mitaken mana means fixing an item. Makeh bepatish means the final blow. It's just 2 terms that are used to describe the same prohibition. Okay, korea is another biblical prohibition, which is to rip. To rip apart like a piece of fabric. If you were to go ahead and take a fabric and rip it apart, that is korea. And so certainly when we think about certain items that we're opening, let's say a bag of chips, is that korea? I'm tearing apart the sealed top. Is that a form of ripping apart korea? Maybe yes, maybe no, but keep in mind that the original source is when it's fabric, okay? And we'll have to think about that in the context of things which are not fabric and perhaps harder than a typical fabric. We'll come back to that. And the last thing, which we're not going to discuss today at all, is mechika, ripping letters, okay? So, literally means erasing.
Skip number 5.
Okay, fine. I skipped number 5, thank you all. Mechatech. Mechatech means precise cutting. It sounds very similar to making a nice opening, but it's going to have different parameters, which we'll discuss as we go into the details. But precise cutting is, even if you somehow get around saying it's not really an issue of making a nice opening, because making a nice opening may be limited to a situation where you first establish it to be a utensil. In other words, making a nice opening in a tissue may not be an issue of making a nice opening, because the whole idea is I'm finishing something. But if it's not even seen as a something, it's seen as something so insignificant, then maybe the whole question of asiyas pesach does not even apply. Making an opening will only apply if you first establish it to be a utensil. Okay, so we'll see some discussion about that. But you still may have an issue of precise cutting. In a tissue, if I start cutting the tissue very, very precisely in a very specific fashion, then I still may be in violation of mechatech, of cutting something in a precise fashion. Okay, so far 5 prohibitions, and the last one, which I jumped ahead to, which is mechika, which is really erasing letters, shouldn't be ripping letters, erasing letters when I cut something up and there's letters on a package or letters on a cake, right? That's a whole discussion to its own. We're not going to have time to get to that one today. We touched upon it a little bit already, but we'll revisit it in the context of the different discussions we're having. Okay, so that's our introduction. It's a little overwhelming, and we'll have to analyze each one of these 6, and today we're just going to analyze the 5 prohibitions as it relates to the different examples we're going to go through. Today we're going to focus on cans of tuna or cans of pickles, can of soda, a spout of a carton of milk, right? You'll have the opening, they don't have those so often anymore, but do they? I don't see them so often, where basically you have like the top of a milk carton or orange juice bottle as opposed to the twist plastic thing, right? I think it's a little bit older, right? I don't think they even have those so much anymore. We'll still talk about it, opening the spout, right? And then you kind of fold it back and make the triangular opening, right? I haven't seen those in a while. Just the twistings. Okay, we'll go through it just conceptually to understand things, and then opening bags of cereal or chips, okay? And then, of course, it doesn't address, the caps on this thing and then the caps on the orange juice that we're going to have to talk about, the little plug that you pull out and all that stuff. Again, we're not going to cover everything today. Maybe 2 classes, likely 3, okay? Good? Okay, it's a big topic. Because again, we're grappling with 6 prohibitions each time, right? It's so loaded. I was trying to figure out the best way to teach this. Initially, I started preparing this last week, and I went through each prohibition on its own. It's like, no way. You have to just go through each example on its own and then go through the prohibitions. I think that's the only way to do this. Okay, so with that, let's jump in. Opening a can of tuna. Okay, so let's begin. First, we'll talk about destroying, right? So you have a can. Right? You have a can of tuna or a can of pickles, right? And so you have this can, is this whole structure. So there are some who say that by breaking open the top, however you break it open, you just destroyed a utensil. You just destroyed a utensil because there was a structure over here which was able to hold things in. And now when you take off the cap, however you take off the cap, whether using a can opener or whether using a knife or whatever it is, or the tab, whatever it is, you just destroyed the utensil. And therefore, there are those, quoted by the Tehillah David and others, who say that it is forbidden because you destroyed the can. However, most rely on the opinion of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Whenever you see RSZA, that is an acronym for Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who is a great, respected authority in the 20th century in Israel. And he said it's permitted. Why is it permitted? Because he says that it is not, it's only considered destroying if you consider this to be a significant utensil. But he says something which you are going to use once and then throw away, the whole concept of a utensil wouldn't even apply. A utensil is something which is going to be reused. You and I think most people, will not reuse a can of tuna. Again, there are people who do, but he says for the most part, we have a can of tuna, we use it, maybe it ends up in a kid's, sandbox or something. If maybe that's, probably not because it's still sharp around the edges. Bottom line is, I think it's safe to say, certainly in America, we're all throwing away the can of tuna, the can of pickles, and therefore he says the issue of destruction does not apply. Yes?
So, many years ago, I was told, if you're going to open a can of tuna on Shabbos, you should...
We're going to get to that.
Okay, but isn't that, but that doesn't...
That doesn't address this. Correct. That's to address another issue.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, but it's...
Correct. It doesn't...
I never knew there were so many issues.
Correct. There's the 6, exactly. So it's complex. You're right. But yes, that is what we're going to get back to. Yes.
What if you use it once after you open it?
It's not seen. He describes even if you go ahead and say, you know what, this can of...
I take out the tuna and I use it as a bowl, let my cat lick out the oil.
Yeah, that's fine. Bottom line is you're throwing it out. And again, even if a person says one time, it's Erev, it's Shabbos of Erev Pesach this year, right? And you have no cups. Like, oh my gosh, okay, so you rinse out the tuna, whatever. You rinse out the tuna can and then you're like a drink or some water. I don't know, whatever. It doesn't matter. His point is that it's defined as disposable, right? You wouldn't, if someone threw it out, you wouldn't cry. It's not like, if someone threw out your cups, what are you doing? Right over here, okay, fine, yeah.
What if somebody's standard is I mash the tuna with the can?
It's still, you're throwing it out. Yeah, it's not an issue. Yeah. Okay, good. So let's talk about building. Okay, the Chazon Ish says, it's not destroying, he says the opposite. Until I take off this, when it's metal, then it's not a functional utensil until I actually take off the top. And therefore the Chazon Ish says the issue isn't destroying, the issue is that I just built a can of tuna or a can of pickles, because until now it was nothing. it was completely sealed. I have no way of accessing it, and therefore on Shabbos I'm not allowed to build something. So by taking off sometimes removing, right? Sometimes destruction is building. So he said the Chazon Ish argues that taking off the tin is a form of building, and therefore the Chazon Ish says opening a can of tuna on Shabbos or a can of pickles on Shabbos would be forbidden for this reason. Okay. However, the Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, for two reasons, says not an issue. One, he says it is disposable, and therefore it's not a utensil. And as much as destruction is not applicable, so too building is not applicable. But he adds there's another point that to say that it's applicable. He argues with the Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish says that you are making it into utensil. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says no, it was a utensil. It was just a covered utensil. Granted, it was sealed very well, but at the end of the day, the utensil already existed. There was a utensil here, a cup carrying tuna. It happened to have a very well sealed metal top. But you didn't make it into utensil. It was a utensil that was sealed, and you just took off the seal. So for those two reasons, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and again, many rely on this, say that it was even if I don't even treat this like utensil because it's disposable. Even if you want to treat it like utensil, it's not really utensil because the fact that it's already a utensil. Now, here some will say, according to the Chazon Ish, who says you can't make it into utensil, so what could you do? If I pierce the back of it, right, then even the Chazon Ish would agree. This is no longer. Then I take off the top. That's no longer utensil. No one would, call this a functional utensil if it has a hole in the bottom, right? If this thing had a hole in the bottom, I'm throwing it out, right? So if I first pierce the bottom of the can of tuna with a knife, and now things are able to, even if it's not dripping excessively, I don't mean like pierce it 100 times, but as long as I make one pierce in it, and therefore it's no longer a functional utensil, there the Chazon Ish would say, yeah, I could take off the top, because there, granted, I made it into, I now give access to it, but I didn't make it into utensil because it's already something which is punctured and therefore not a proper functional utensil. And that's where the piercing on the bottom comes from. Again, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach would say, no need to do so because of the fact that it's already utensil, and B, it's disposable, no issue. Okay, what about making a nice opening? Okay, so here, let's talk about this a little bit more, right? So is it making a nice, when I pull off the cap of the tuna, whether it's using, by the way, those who permit opening a can of tuna would permit you using a can opener, right? Or using the tab, okay? Both would be fine. We'll see some limitation in a moment of how far to go with the opening, possibly, but it would be fine to use both, okay? Now, the question is, are you making a nice opening or not? What do you think? When you're taking off the cap, are you making, let's just take it a tab. Are you making a nice opening or not? Okay, so some would argue yes, okay? Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, again, you see this little trend over here. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is very lenient when it comes to a lot of these package-oriented things. He says two things. One is, this whole concept of making a nice opening is only when it's utensil. This is disposable. Again, for the same reason he's knocked out the others, no problem. But he adds another thing, and he says that even if you want to say it's utensil, he says, when do you say that it's like a nice opening when it has a very particular shape that's going to allow it to come out in a specific size? So, for example, and I'm jumping ahead of myself, when you open a can of soda, right, you don't take off the whole thing. Why don't you take off the whole thing with a can of soda? Why don't they have like a tuna can, where I just take off the whole thing? Why don't I do that? Because I want to limit it, right? I want to have a very particular flow, right? And they actually, there's a lot of, if you look it up, they actually have changed over the course of time, and different companies have different sizes. Do they want you drinking too much, too little, right? So there's a whole science involved with exactly how much of the tab should be open to ensure you get a certain amount of flow at the same time, right? At a time, it's very deliberate. When it comes to opening the entire top, some argue that's not called. Yes, it's true. It's a very nice opening. But it's just opening the top. That's not called a nice opening. And therefore, Shlomo Zalman says for two reasons. One, it's disposable. No issue of opening of the top. But even if you want to say it's disposable, it's metal, it's not really disposable, at the end of the day, I'm just trying to open the top, right? And therefore, it's not going to be an issue. It's not going to be an issue. Fascinating explanation. Okay? And therefore...
So even something like that?
Oh, whoa. Not getting into this yet. Okay.
So what about the orange juice one?
Not getting into that either.
Okay, so
not getting, yeah. I'm talking about a
can.
can of tuna and a can of pickles right now. That's the only thing. Yeah. Sorry. Each one's going to have its own discussion, so I'm going to keep it. Sorry. Okay, I should have been drinking out of a can of tuna today, right? Okay. So ripping, right? So Korea, ripping. So there we said, is ripping going to be an issue? No, because it's metal, right? Ripping is only when I'm ripping my fabric, when I'm ripping a shirt, when I'm ripping, something which is fabric, something which is soft, really.
What's the principle that it's only soft?
Because it's based on the building of the Mishkan. When they would build the curtains, they would sometimes have holes. There are a lot of far more insects eating through the materials. So they would rip it apart and then kind of like fold it over. I don't know how sewing works, but basically like fold it over and then start stitching again. But basically, it was specifically found in the curtains of the Mishkan, and therefore its ripping is specifically limited to that.
Because we take a lot of things that were done in the Mishkan and extrapolate them further.
We broaden it. Correct. It's understood that ripping is considered like breaking apart. It's just like a different term. That's I think how they understand it. You and I in English may say if it's soft metal, you may call that ripping. If I rip apart aluminum can, we may call that ripping. Korea, I think the terminology is like this is fabric. This is limited to fabric.
And a bag of potato chips is
We're gonna get there. It's soft. So we'll see. We're gonna get there. Okay. Precise cutting. Okay, so even if you get around making a nice opening, again, the issue of making a nice opening is that it's the final touch in creating something. Again, the term was mitakin mana, which means finishing a utensil. And therefore, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach pointed out that since one of his reasons for being lenient was since it's a can of tuna which is disposable, maybe it's not even, there's no issue to begin with. But precise cutting, that is relevant even if it's not a utensil, right? Precise cutting, the most famous, most common example of precise cutting is what? Toilet paper, right? You have toilet paper. You want the things. The reason they make that perforation for you is because it's convenient to have that size square of toilet paper, right? So that's a classic case of precise cutting. That's not a utensil. It's just that it's precise cutting. So here, what about precise cutting? Over here, one could argue, granted, it's not maybe an opening, but there is some precision over here about the cutting. So again, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and others say, nah, you don't care about the precise cutting. You just want to get the cover off. As opposed to, let's go back to toilet paper for a second. Excuse me for the example, but the point is that there's a particular convenience in having a piece that size. Okay? Scientists sat around for ages, for decades, and figured out this is the perfect size of toilet paper. Okay, but in other words, there's a cheshbon, there's a calculation saying there's endless roll of paper, and this is a good size. This is a size that's convenient for people. With a can of tuna, you just want to get the thing off to get the thing out, right? That's the point. It's like you just want to get rid of this thing. If someone were to somehow make this thing disappear, you'd be fine, right? You don't need this can opening in this size. You just want to get rid of it, right? And therefore, many say that it's permitted. Rav Elyashiv argues that although we could say it's permitted, to demonstrate that you don't really care about its precise size, it's best to leave a little bit of it on. And this is what many people do, and that is when they open a can of tuna or a can of pickles, they will not take it off entirely. They'll leave a little bit on. So especially when it comes to those the tabs, right? You pull it off, leave a little bit of it on, and that demonstrates that it's not that you are, that demonstrating that it's not about a precise opening, because that clearly the fact you're not pulling it off entirely, leaving a little bit in place, that shows that you are, that you don't care about the precise opening, and that's the best way to do it. So the bottom line is, let's talk about cans of tuna and cans of pickles. Though if you were to ask me what to do, what I would tell you is that they're able to be opened in the regular fashion, meaning you can use a can opener, you could use the tab, and some suggest, although I don't do this, some suggest that first you should go ahead and pierce the bottom of the can of tuna. I don't do this based on Shlomo Zalman. It's not really a utensil, it's something which is disposable, but again, there are those who argue to do so, and again, if you want to be in situations where if you're able to leave a little bit of the opening intact, to make sure it's not fully open, it can't hurt to do so, but if that's not practical, let's say it's, or someone pulls it off all the way, or you're using a can opener, it's going to be too hard with the can opener to go ahead and leave a little bit on, there's what's rely upon to open a can of tuna or a can of pickles entirely and not being an issue. I'll just mention parenthetically, borer, right? There is a borer question which comes up. Sorry? Nah, well, let's see. You'll see what I mean in a second. So that's really not going to be an issue because it's just dripping out a little bit. It's not really, if you pierce like one pierce, typically it's not going to start flowing out like a little. You don't have to you don't start doing a whole Alfred Hitchcock thing. You basically just do a little bit of a pierce and whatever. But even borer over there, if you recall, did we learn borer together? We learned a little bit of borer at some point. Borer, there is a lot of discussion about what's considered a mixture, right? And if you have something very large with something which is a liquid, then most poskim say that is not considered a mixture, right? So for example, if you have your can of tuna and you have tuna juice and you have tuna, right? So most people want to get rid of is there a word for it? Tuna juice. What's it called?
It's either water or oil.
Oil, that's what it is, right? So oil. So basically you could go ahead and allow the oil to be separated. However, if you recall, I think we discussed this together. We're talking about coffee, I think. And basically once it's mixed, once it starts slowing down, once it starts being less of a flow, then already it's stuff which is not embedded, but it's really mixed in with the tuna, right? There you need to stop. Right? So if you have oil over the tuna, you could hold the cap. I think someone mentioned, you mentioned holding the cap. You could start pouring out the oil, but the second it starts slowing down, then you know that you're hitting a point where it's really the oil that's mixed into the tuna. That already is considered a mixture, and you can't pour it anymore. Okay, so you want to be careful. You can be in violation of a biblical prohibition. So the initial pour, a quick pour, that's fine. But basically, once you start getting into a place where it starts slowing down in any way, shape, or form, you stop, and you can't do that anymore. Okay, so again, opening can of tuna, certainly what's rely upon to open it entirely. Open the pickles, open it entirely with the can opener, with the tab. There's what's rely upon. If you want to be go above, and, if you want to be sensitive to the ruling of the Chazon Ish, you pierce the bottom. If you want to be sensitive to the ruling of the Rav Elyashiv, you would leave a little bit of the top open. Yes.
So you just,
It's a little the top closed, excuse me, yes.
you just mentioned the tuna and the pickles, but you're saying this applies to anything in a can, any food.
Yes, any food in a can, which has the top, as opposed to a soda can, meaning where there's a tab, where there's like olives, corn, whatever it is. Yeah, yes, sorry, yeah, absolutely. Okay, good? So far so good? Good. You can open your tuna cans, great. Or corn or whatever. Okay, opening a can of soda. Okay, so a lot of this is going to be similar to the last discussion with one very important difference. Okay, so let's begin. So in terms of destroying, this would be the same issue of destroying as we saw above, which one opinion says, yeah, you're destroying. It was a utensil, and now it's broken because now the water is going to pour, the soda is going to pour out from the top, and therefore there's those who say it's destroying. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, it's not significant. What do you do with a can of soda when you're done? You throw in the garbage. You don't save it. Who saves a can of soda, right? And therefore, it's disposable, and therefore he says it's permitted. Okay, and then you have the same discussion when it comes to building, right? You have the Chazon Ish who says it's forbidden because the Chazon Ish takes the opposite attack. He says that while it was closed, it wasn't a utensil. When I opened it, now it's functional. So I've just built on Shabbos. Again, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says two reasons why that's not the case. One is it's disposable. You didn't make anything. We don't call this a thing. It's not a utensil. It's disposable. Therefore, it doesn't fall under the category of utensil, and therefore you have not built on Shabbos. And B, the opening was there. You're just, you're just like giving access to the opening, but it wasn't like you're building. It was already utensil already. Fine. And then when talking about making a nice opening, right? Which is the makeh bepatish, the final step of creating. So there again, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said that are you allowed to make a nice opening in a tissue? I know it sounds bizarre. It's meant to sound bizarre. Of course you are, because it's not a utensil. It's not a utensil. Making a nice opening is a part of the biblical prohibition of makeh bepatish, putting the final blow on an item. And therefore, since he holds that a can is disposable, therefore, you'd say making a nice opening would not be applicable because making a nice opening is only relevant when it comes to a utensil. This is not a utensil. Halachically, he's not treating a disposable utensil as a utensil. Okay? Further, he argues that really you're not making a nice opening. This is just the only way to access it. Meaning, as opposed to, let's say you have something where, let's go back to the toilet paper, right? So, that's not a best example, but you have scenarios where there's different ways of opening it, and you want to make a nice opening. You have a choice. You make this type of opening, that type of opening. The way they constructed the can is, this is the only way I get my soda is if I open this. It's not like I want this nice opening. I just want to get in. And that, therefore, he argues that it's not making a nice opening, A, because it's disposable, B, it's just an opening. It's not a nice opening. It's not like it's just access. It's not a Pesach. It's not a door.
What if there was another way of opening it?
What if there...
Like one of those, people are saying they don't make it anymore. The orange juice ones, I think the cheap orange juice they sell at Aldi has them.
Mm-hmm.
You could just stick a hole in there and not make that little V thing.
Then that right. So we're going to get to that case, and that would be a real issue. Then correct, and exactly for that reason. So good. That's exactly the point. Ripping with the can of soda. So we'll come back to that point in a moment. Ripping is not going to be an issue because again, it's metal. Okay. Here's where it gets a little more complicated with cans, and that is precise cutting. Again, as we saw, precise cutting is not limited to a utensil. Even if it's not a utensil, like a piece of toilet paper, you could have precise cutting. So Rav Elyashiv says it is forbidden because the precise shape is, again, as we saw earlier, as opposed to the can of tuna, I just want to get rid of this opening. But with a can of soda, if someone were to say, do you mind if I just chop off the top of your can of soda? I wouldn't want that, right? Aside from the fact it's very sharp. But the point is I wouldn't want that because I want that very precise opening so that it'll pour the way I want it to pour into my mouth. And therefore, Rav Elyashiv argues that although, as Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is about, as we'll see, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, you don't really care the exact size. It could be a little smaller, a little larger, and therefore it's not really called precise cutting. Rav Elyashiv says, at the end of the day, you do want a particular type of opening. whether it's a little bit bigger, smaller, you wouldn't want it to be completely open at the top. You do want, why not? I think most.
Whenever you want to cut yourself.
No, don't forget if it's cutting. I was joking about the cutting. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But even without the cutting, it's harder to drink. Meaning, soda's meant. It's the same way that this bottle of water is not open wide across the bottom. Right? It doesn't have, because anything that's meant to be held. I believe there's a meaning this is not open the same way that your jug of milk is open, because a jug of milk, it doesn't matter if there's a big opening because you're pouring it. But anything you're walking around with, you want to have a small opening.
But if you had a cup, if you had a cup, it has and you drink from that.
That you're talking about a particular case. You're right. In theory,
chopped off the top of the can and be like holding a cup and drinking.
True. But my point. But I think his point is that you can't argue that this is just happenstance. That all handheld items have a narrow opening. It's clearly deliberate, right? It's clearly deliberate. And you're right. In your case, in a particular case, if you're a polite person, not doing what I'm doing right now, you'd pour it into a cup, and that would be the polite thing too. If I'd have a cup, I would love to do that. But the point is that whatever. Bottom line is, this is very convenient, and this is a normal way for them they structure it deliberately, because people want to be able to walk around and drink this as they play sports. They walk around. The same would be true for a soda. You wouldn't want to have a soda, the wide open thing, because it's handheld and it's going to mix. It's going to spill when you walk. And therefore, Yashiv argues that it is precise cutting, and therefore you wouldn't be allowed to do so. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach again says you don't really care if it's large or small, and therefore he says it's permitted. Okay, so here you have a little bit more of a debate. Okay, so there are many who don't open cans on Shabbos for this reason, whether it's beer cans or soda cans. There certainly is what to rely upon. Okay, it's certainly what to rely upon. Again, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, not a halachic slouch, and his argument is that you don't really care about the opening of the size. Rav Elyashiv's argument to me sounds a little bit compelling, and so again, there's certainly what to rely upon. If you've been opening cans and you want to continue opening cans, there's certainly what to rely upon. Rav Elyashiv argues not. If you do open cans, I would recommend not opening them all the way, right? Keeping similar to what we saw before, because if you do like again, you could open it, but leave it like, as opposed to like if you pull the tab on like a can of soda, you could pull it all the way, and then the tab moves out of the way entirely. If you open it partially and you leave the tab down there, you can still get everything you want out of it, but it makes it a little bit less, fully open, and therefore that might, move you a little bit closer to Rav Elyashiv's sensitivity, because then you didn't open it like in its precise size, in its fullest sense. Okay, so again, there's what to rely upon. There's many who do, but there are many who don't, and if you do, I would recommend trying to meet somewhere in the middle by keeping part of it closed. A bunch of hands. I don't know who had their hands up first. Yeah, go ahead.
So does it help you? You said to leave the tab partially on, but if you want to pour it all out and throw away the can,
I don't. It's a good question. So I think it's more about like what's universally done. I think that's really the question. The question is, at the end of the day, this opening is seen as a meaningful opening. I think that's the point. I believe it's not so much about the subjective situation where I'm just pouring it all out. I believe it's more about the practice. Yeah.
So you keep using that as an example.
I'm doing that because I'm annoyingly confusing. Okay.
Is the water bottle considered the same as a can?
No, because this thing is going to be a whole different discussion, which we're not going to get into today. So I should stop using this as an example. I should have brought in props. I'm sorry. It's my bad. It's really my bad. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I don't know if this was discussed last week, but I'm really struggling with the concept that disposable is not a keli, because Roshel Zalman was known to be very frugal. So maybe he didn't use, but like in our world, you could have a whole Shabbos meal with a Kiddush cup. That's all disposable.
Yeah, but what do you do when you're done with the meal?
Just because you throw it out, but even though it serves as a keli.
100%. Actually, so much so, sorry to interject, but so much so that, there are poskim who are typically you'll find more stringency about this in Israel, where it's not the same disposable economy that we have. Over here, it's not so much about its functionality. Everyone agrees a can of soda. Everyone agrees this imaginary can of soda is very functional right now. The point is that since I'm going to throw it out, by definition, that's not called a kli. And by the way, it's based on without the Gemaras it's a very complex sugya, but I know I usually try, and I've been a little slacking off a little bit, but trying to go through the earlier sources. This is one of those where it's but the Gemara discusses a case where you had figs that were transported with like these pieces of wood, slats of wood surrounding it, and the point is that it was almost like a wrapper. right? And so they would cut off the slats, and the slats would fall apart, and then they would go ahead and eat it. So it was good. It was wood, and it was an ancient world where they were very frugal, exceptionally frugal. They didn't have anything, and nonetheless, there are concept things which are seen as just like they're buttal to the item. They're just like it's just like a wrapper, and that's how he's seeing these things. That granted, it's real and it's firm and it's doing something, but the point is, since it's not going to be reused, by definition, it's not going to be considered a utensil. Yes.
I don't know if this will make things better or worse, but years ago, Rabbi Weinreb said that you should not use a disposable cup for a kiddush cup because it doesn't have the same, it's not as important. So that would, I think, support like the, disposal you get rid of, but.
Yeah, I deliberately used one yesterday in Shul, if anyone's looking closely. Okay, so they didn't have a Kiddush cup, and this is my big machlokas. There's a big machlokas. Ramosha was not a fan of using the disposable cups, but there are many poskim who say that they're totally fine. But yeah, are you saying, your point is that maybe there's a stira there? You're saying that according to that maybe that's not going to be considered. And the criteria is a little bit different. It has to be chashuv. There the criteria is chashivos, is significance.
I don't know if he was saying no disposable.
No. He I'm sure he was. Ramosha Feinstein was opposed. What Ramosha would argue is that if you had a disposable cup, you should use 2 cups. Whatever. My teachers felt that a good, solid, those strong plastic ones, presumably are sufficient without doing that. But anyway, that's sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, but
I was waiting for someone to jump on me. Yeah.
Bottles of grape juice or wine.
Yeah.
Opening them up, especially the ones with
the metal. Next week, or 2 weeks from now. Not going there. Good. Yeah, very, very significant question.
Is like using a large water bottle.
Yeah.
Opening that up on Shabbos, because that you're not going to drink.
Correct. But the point.
Pour into cups.
Correct. So again, over there, we're not getting it. Well, let's hold off on bottles. Let's hold off on bottles because it's going to be a different discussion. But even if, let's just say, just to go back to your point of large versus small, you have sometimes these large cans. 2 things. One, sometimes you have a large can. It's usually beer. They have that, right? They have these large beer cans. You ever see those? Whatever. Okay, good. What's it called? But
Red Bull is bigger.
Okay. Right, they're thin. Yeah, so even if it's not finished right away, the post can point out 2 things. One, first of all, anything that has fizz, which is usually what has those types of cans, usually they're not going to be good after a while. So you are going to dispose them at some point. The second thing is that even if it takes a while to finish, many will still say that it's still considered disposable because once you do finish it, it's done. Okay, so again, I'm still talking about cans. I don't want to get into the water bottles yet or the grape juice bottles. We'll save that for another week. Okay, but good. The questions are demonstrating that we're getting the concept, but it's complicated. Okay, so let's talk about opening the spout of a carton of milk or orange juice, right? Not the typical modern ones, the fancier ones like Tropicana, where you have that hole with that ring that you pull out. We're not talking about that today. We will, God willing, revisit that, have a chance to visit that. Today we're talking about more of the old school, the cheaper cartons of milk, right? And basically you have the spout, right? All milks used to have this, right? Where you pull back the spout and then you open it. So let's go through the different possible prohibitions. We're on the second page right now, the second side. So when it comes to destroying, okay, it's permitted. Okay, there's nothing that's being ruined over here. You're just separating the glued top. So even those who said earlier that there was an issue of destroying something before you had something good and now it's no good, here you're not really breaking anything. You're just opening it apart, and therefore everyone says it's permitted. Similarly, when it comes to building, even the Chazon Ish would say it's permitted over here because he says when it's metal and it's what's the term when it's sealed that way? It's sealed very well. What's it called? Hermetically sealed. Thank you. Yes, hermetically sealed. There, it's like it wasn't functional, and now you're making it functional. When it comes to something made out of cardboard, it's already seen as a utensil. It's not sealed the same way, and therefore even the Chazon Ish is lenient about building. Okay. However, let's get into making a nice opening. Okay. So Ramosha says it's forbidden. It's forbidden to be you're making a nice opening over here. This is something which certainly you have the larger cartons. It's something which is going to be, the reason you're opening it this way is because you have different ways of opening it, right? I could just make a hole in the side of the carton, right? And I decide to use that spout, and that spout has this nice little thing which pours. I'm making a nice opening, and therefore this is considered makeh bepatish, and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach argues that it is therefore going to be forbidden for this reason. Excuse me, Rav Moshe Feinstein argues that it's going to be forbidden for this reason, to open it with a nice spout, because you are making this makeh bepatish, you are finishing the construction over here and creating the nice spout, which enables you to use it and reuse it. Again, not to fill it up again, but you pour 1 cup and you pour another cup, and therefore this is seen as a regular spout, which has regular reuse, and therefore he says it is going to be prohibited.
What
If it's a small one, Rav Moshe would probably be lenient, because his argument is that since it's being used and reused, it's clearly meant as that's the reason. Again, reuse doesn't mean I'm filling it up again, but it's more than just a one time and then throw it away. You have a whole jug of orange juice or milk, and therefore he says it's forbidden. And whereas the Orch HaShabbos says, although it wasn't accessible, that opening was always there. It's just that they glued the top together. So are you really doing something new? The whole thing of Makeh B'Patish is I'm doing something new. So the Orch HaShabbos argues, no, the thing was already there. I'm just getting access to it. I'm pulling apart the glue to get access to it, and therefore he says it's permitted. Okay. It is who is it? It's one of the more modern books on Shabbos. As it's a student of Rav Neivert. I'm blanking on his name. It's a pretty well accepted. It's not an outlier. Okay, ripping. What about ripping over here? So the Chazon Ish says that it is going to be an issue of ripping. Again, it's a soft material. Okay, and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says whenever you're ripping something which is disposable, there's no issue of ripping. Ripping is true for your clothing, right? Again, as we saw, it's limited to your question earlier. What about metal? So he says, of course, everyone agrees it's a hard material. Everyone agrees it doesn't apply to metal. What about something? So the Chazon Ish says that at the end of the day, it's soft material, and therefore ripping applies. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says if it's something you're going to throw out after use, ripping korea does not apply at all, and therefore there is no prohibition of ripping. Yes?
It's been a long time since I opened one of those cartons, but if you're careful, can you not, in other words, you're separating the glue, you're not actually ripping the...
Right, that would still be, since it was attached and you're detaching it, that's also included in korea. So it's not because you're ripping apart the carton, it's actually the glue itself, it was strongly attached, and therefore it's separating it. Or if you recall, we saw, this is the class, I think, maybe that was the class, or whatever. Anyway, if you like post-it notes, there's a discussion, it's not really so firmly placed, but when it's something which is really glued together, and you have two pieces of paper glued together, and you take them apart, this is the argument that this is really a form of korea, and according to the Chazon Ish, this would be prohibited. Okay? Yeah.
Speaking of spout, this just happened yesterday. I had bought a whole new thing of Morton salt, and it actually has, the cartons of Morton salt, but it's got a little metal spout that's covered with a label.
Okay.
And you pull off the label to open the spout. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Right, it has like a piece of just whatever, like a
Got
plastic
piece of
something
metal,
or
it's got a piece of
paperish.
metal.
Yeah. So taking that piece off, what would be the issue taking the piece off? The opening certainly exists. Let's assume you're not ripping any letters. What possible prohibition you're saying? Is there korea? Is there tearing? There, it's certainly disposable. I don't believe there'd be any. Right? Because the opening already exists.
I didn't open it.
Yeah, the opening already exists. There's certainly the opening there. It's literally a built-in opening, which is there. It's just it's covered. It's covered by a piece of junk. Halachically, I don't mean and therefore it's not a utensil. Meaning we talk about tearing. Right? We said the Chazon Ish is is. You're certainly not creating anything, right? Okay, and then precise cutting, there are many who say it's permitted because there's no exact measurement over here. You're just like opening it up. It's kind of similar to opening the top of the tuna, and therefore permitted from that respect. So the real issue is whether you're making a nice opening, which Rav Moshe said there's an issue with. That would be the main issue that many of us would be concerned with, and therefore Rav Moshe suggests is that you don't open those bottles on Shabbos, because doing so is making a nice opening. It's completing the making of this utensil. It's Makeh B'Patish. It was a store. In other words, like this. Before you opened it, it was a storage utensil. When you opened it, now you made it a storage utensil with a nice spout. So you just finished its creation, and therefore Rav Moshe says it's forbidden. So what you could do is if you make it like a bad spout. So what some people do is like tear off the other side. I believe, and I didn't have a chance to look at this, but I believe, if I recall, again, I haven't opened one of these in a long time, and I'm trying to remember who had this leniency, but basically if you rip off the entire top, then there are those who argue that that's no longer a nice opening. It's kind of like taking off the top of the tuna. So it sounds very logical to me. I remember that's what we did, meaning should have brought stuff. Okay, so again, you have your top of your thing over here. So usually I'd open like one side, and I make this triangle thing. Is this looking sense? So instead, I dig my fingers at the top over here, and I just open this whole thing. So it's a square. No longer a nice opening. It's no longer a spout. It's just a square.
And try to pour it.
No, you can pour. You can pour in an angle. It works.
You can't close.
Yeah. It's annoying. Can't close it, but I'm pretty sure that post. Again, I can't quote to you someone who allows that. And Rav Moshe's suggestion that others give is like make a hole. Like they suggest making a hole near the top. If you make a hole, certainly that's not a nice opening. You're just like using your scissors or a knife to make a little hole over there. That's a terrible opening. Everyone's going to agree that's not makeh b'patish, and that certainly is okay. If you go ahead and you want to use one of these jugs and you want to make a hole, it's permitted. Again, I can't quote to you who. I apologize, I forgot to look into this further, but I remember as a kid, we used to open the entire top, and that sounds identical to the can of tuna, where if the issue is making a nice hole and you're just taking off the whole top, it's no longer making a nice hole. It's just access, right? And once it's access, it's not a problem. So therefore, again, opening the entire top would be okay. Yes, it makes closing it and reusing it a little bit more annoying, but that would be a permitted way to access it on Shabbos. Okay. Last example for today, and that is opening bags of cereal or chips. Okay, and we have to keep in mind: are we talking about a big bag or a small bag? Okay, those things are going to play a difference into this discussion. So when it comes to destroying a building, is a plastic bag a utensil? Absolutely not. So destroying a building is not going to be an issue whatsoever. Okay, is it called a nice opening? Okay, so for a small bag where there is no reuse, right? So Ramosha said, if when we talked about the carton of orange juice, since I'm reusing it, there's going to be an issue. If it's a small bag of chips, one-time use, therefore there's no question whatsoever. Okay, for a large bag, here you run into the same issue, and therefore what is suggested over here is that if you're opening a bag of cereal or it's more going to be with cereal, where you like a bag of chips. Typically, I think people typically open the entire thing, right? Even if it's a big bag of chips. Am I the only one? Right, we all do. Okay. When it comes to a bag of cereal, you don't want to do that, right? Because it gets, especially not with little kids, because we open the entire top and they start pouring it and they pour it a little bit too much. Right? You have what you have anyways, okay? But basically you have like a big mess of cereal. So what do you typically do? You open a small amount, right? And then pour it out. On Shabbos, that would be making a nice opening, right? And therefore, what is suggested is that if you're going to open a bag of cereal on Shabbos, open the entire top. Then you're no longer making a nice opening, and that would also, that would be the thing too. Yes?
So right now, you're just talking about the bag of the cereal inside.
I'm not talking about the box.
Okay.
We're going to come back to the box.
Okay.
We're going to come back to the box. Yes, exactly. Okay, just the bag. So again, on Shabbos, if it's a small bag, anyways, you're opening the entire top, fine. If it's a big bag, right, so even if it's a small bag of cereal, let's say you have those like little bags of cereal, tiny little personal size, and they come in a bag, let's just say, open the entire bag, no problem. Open the bag, even a little bit would be no problem. But if you have a big bag that's going to be used and reused, right, over the course of whatever amount of bowls of cereal, there you'd have to open the entire top of the bag, is to ensure that you're not making a nice opening at the top of that bag. Okay, when it comes to ripping, so Rav Elyashiv says that it is forbidden. It is a form of ripping. Rav Shlomo Zalman says, no, you're not ripping because it's just sealed. And a seal was not meant to remain sealed permanently, as opposed to something which is like glued shut. It's sealed with a very, very flimsy glue, meaning you can even distinguish, which some do, between like a plastic bag, which like usually a kid could open, and like the cartons, which most little kids are not, like it's much more firmly sealed, right? So those little bags, Rosh Hashanah said everyone should say it's fine because it's just sealed with a little bit of thin amounts of glue, and therefore there's no issue. And many rely on this and saying there's no issue of tearing. Okay. The last thing we have to discuss when it comes to a bag, and it's not going to be true for a cereal bag, but let's say something like craisins or some other things where you have a little bit of a slit. Right, you have a little bit of like an incision in the beginning in order to give you a good place to open it and tear it open. And sometimes it's there specifically because under it there is like a zipper of some sort. There's like a ziplock under it. So do you want that small? Do you want that opening in that place? Many argue, yes, you do. Because you want it precisely there, right? Is this precise cutting? So granted, it's only the beginning where it looks precise, but at the end of the day, you do want it in that space. And therefore, Yashiv says you cannot use that little thing. That would be forbidden on Shabbos, and many rule like that. Rav Shlomo Zalman says, nah, you don't care if it's exactly there, a little above, a little below, and therefore Rav Shlomo Zalman was lenient about this. But I think most are stringent, like Rav Elyashiv, saying that in such a case, you could use a knife. And when you go with a knife, everyone knows if you're using a knife, it's not going to be as precise. Granted, it's still in that area, but it's not going to be as precise, and therefore using a knife in that area is going to be permitted, even according to Rav Elyashiv. It's tearing exactly there. That's when it's too precise and would not be allowed. So again, to summarize.
But wouldn't that be a problem with the Ziploc? Because that's something that you're going to reuse, you're creating, like you are accessing something that is...
So therefore, what you're saying, and therefore, I've created like an which one of the prohibitions?
The utensil wasn't there because it wasn't sealed as a Ziploc, right?
So you're saying creating a utensil?
Yeah.
So most of the boards we're going to say with a bag, a plastic bag.
But I'm talking about the ones with the Ziploc.
Even still, the fact ultimately a plastic bag by definition, you're done those craisins, no one's
So
keeping
you
it.
you can use a knife anywhere above the Ziploc. It doesn't have
Correct.
to be below
Correct.
the Ziploc.
Correct. Just by using a knife, it by definition is imprecise, and therefore it's okay. To use that little incision, again, according to Rosh Zalman, would be okay. Rav Yashav said not. So again, to summarize, if you have a small bag of chips, cereal, whatever, you could open it however you want. Small, big, no problem, because you're going to finish it, throw it out, right? Or it's typically open and thrown out. A larger bag has to be open all the way. Okay, has to be open all the way. And when it comes to an area where there is a small little incision, there you should ideally cut above. If someone used incision, in that case, there's certainly what to rely upon. Rosh Zalman Auerbach saying, at the end of the day, it's not so precise, it's not exact, and therefore allowed. Again, I would recommend using a knife to chop off the top over there, and that would be okay. Okay, yes?